Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. And today we are going to be talking to an author, frankly, whose work is not familiar to me, but boy, am I glad I discovered a book called The Hard Way, a Jack Reacher novel. The author is Lee Child and is published by Delacorte Press. Thank you very much.
Thank you for asking me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no, I do have to confess, this is my first Jack Reacher experience, and so some of my questions may be, very jejune, if you will, very, very elementary. But one of the interesting things about this book package is that it has some truth on it. I mean, I get the feeling once in a while that people who endorse books tend to exaggerate. But in your case, that didn't happen. The New York Times says, pure escapist gold. The gold is the important word. Not for nothing do reviewers tell readers to disconnect the phone when the latest Reacher knockout comes along. And I advise you, all of you out there, to do that. You really do keep us going.
Well, that's the plan, and like you say, the plan is if you read one, you're probably going to want to read the others, and that's the strength of doing a series like this, that if you don't get them first time around, you're going to get them second time around. You're going to get
them another time, and this is actually number 10.
It is number 10, but don't let that worry anybody. You can start this series any place. You can start with any book, and it works just as well.
Okay, that's good to know. Now, we need, us newcomers, we need some help to understand this character, Jack Reacher. The only thing that sticks right away with me is that he's very big and he's ex-MP.
Yeah, he's huge. He's a big guy, 6'5" and 250, which is a literal description of how I picture the character as a contemporary, real person. It's also a metaphor for the fact that he's a guy not afraid of anything. He's confident physically, confident mentally, pretty much invulnerable. So in a sense, he's a mythic character, and although the books are entirely contemporary, entirely rooted in the real world of today, they're also mythic tales in as much as this character has actually been around forever. This character has been reinvented continuously over thousands of years because people need a guy like this around. They need the white knight who shows up at the right moment. They need the Western character who rides in off the range, sorts out the trouble, and then disappears into the sunset. So this is really a version of a character that has been essential to human storytelling forever.
And his history, at least in the book that I've read, goes back into World War II, where he was wearing the white hat there and had military experience. Very tough. Yeah,
not as far back as World War II, but he was a serving military officer, and before that he was a military brat because his father was a Marine.
Uh-huh.
And so that he has spent the first 36 years of his life entirely sealed inside that bubble that was the U.S. military. Then at the age of 36, he was shaken loose by what we now call the peace dividend, when the military got smaller with the fall of Soviet Russia. And there's no more difficult transition to make than for a guy who's been in the military his entire life to then transition into civilian society and cope with it. And Reacher doesn't necessarily cope with it that great. He is a wanderer, a drifter, rootless, restless, and kind of condemned by his restlessness to wander the nation and see what life throws at him.
And he's also brazen. There's a moment here where he says, "Work with me. We've got a lot to do." And his associate says, "You told Lane you'd give him a name tomorrow." I had to say something. I had to get him out of here. "Can we do it by tomorrow?" "I don't see why not." "Where are we going to start?" "I have absolutely no idea." I love that. I call that brazen. I don't know. Maybe it's courageous.
Maybe it's overconfident, yeah.
It could be. However, there's another moment early on in the book. I call it a stopper. Mm-hmm. The book opens with Jack getting involved in this kidnap situation, and he goes to a fellow by the name of Lane, whose wife has been kidnapped, and he goes through a whole thing about how many guys were involved, where they came from, upstate New York. It couldn't have been anyplace else. He goes on and on and on. And 3 guys far away, upstate, on a farm. And then there's a line there, a pause, But Reacher, you write, was completely wrong. Just 4 miles away, through the electric city darkness right there in the island of Manhattan, a lone man pushed open a door to a small, hot room. Then he stepped back. Kate Lane and her daughter Jade passed in front of him. Without meeting his eyes, the lone man closed the door and walked away. So we have here a fellow who's, brazen, and you make him very honest as well. We're going to look at something when we come back. We're going to look at this fellow, Edward Lane, whose wife has been kidnapped, and he's very wealthy. We're going to find out how he got that way when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
The book is called The Hard Way, a Jack Reacher novel. The author, Lee Child, is with us, and this is number 10 in the series, and I am assured that all other 9 are at your bookstore right now in glorious paperback, which means they're not as expensive as the hardcover, as we all know. The book list had a few words to say about the new book in what they call a starred review, which means they really liked it. Quote, "Like all the best thrillers, this one is about more than pace. The narrative propels you forward with a locomotive's thrust, but Child never loses sight of the small detail or the human fabric." And we're going to get to some of the detail in a little bit. What I want to do now, though, is to focus on what I call the nasty business of illegal soldiers for hire. Is this a realistic thing you're talking about from research?
It is. It's from direct experiences of soldiers that have talked to me about it. Because, as you point out, this series has been around for 10 years now, and 9 of the previous books are available in paperback, and all of those titles are all over the military because they're fundamentally about the military, these books, and therefore soldiers read them. And that right now they're out there in the desert with not very much to do. They read them, they like them, they write to me, email me. And
reminds me of the movie and the book Jarhead, where they sat around with nothing to do. Yeah.
Very similar to that, except Jarhead was the first Gulf War when email was a little rarer than it is now. We have a fully wired military.
Correct.
And so the email pours in from these guys. And because the series is now 10 books long, a lot of these guys their service years are up, and their reservist commitment is also finished. And so they're coming out now at the end of their careers, and they're being offered enormous sums of money to go back in as private contractors. That's the polite word they use now, private military corporation. And some of them are taking it and some of them are not. And the ones that are taking it are telling some pretty interesting stories.
Wow. The name that our friends calls his company is Operational Security Consultants.
Yeah, because they tend to pick out a bland sort of name like that that's going to look unsuspicious in the Yellow Pages.
That's a nice idea, to be unsuspicious in the Yellow Pages. One of the things that I think people should know is that there is, as book list says, a lot of elaborate detail in this book. There is a more detailed description of a shoe in this book than any other book that I've read, and I've had at one time in my life to write jacket copy for shoemaking books. His shoes were bench made by a company called Cheney from Northampton in England, smarter buys than Church's, which are right around the corner here, which were basically the same shoes but with a premium tag for the name. The style Reacher had chosen was called Tender Ten, which was a brown semi-brogue made of heavy pebbled leather, size 12. The soles were heavy composite items brought in from a company called Daynite. Reacher hated leather soles. They wore out too fast and stayed wet too long after rain. Daynites were better. Each shoe he had on weighed more than 2 pounds. Now, this is thrown at us just as he's about to break down a door.
Right.
I loved it.
Well, I just do that instinctively, and I've always done it in every book. I mean, to me, it's too straightforward, too easy, too superficial somehow, just to say he walked up and kicked down the door.
Just keep pounding away,
Yeah, you've got to have some kind of little pause there, little insight there that just gives you a tiny little pause before the explosive action starts again. And I'm the world's hugest trivia buff, and I love to.
Are you?
Yeah, I love to specify things exactly, and I love to look at things and figure out how they're made. And I like those same shoes. When I was writing that passage, I remember sitting looking at my own shoes. I was wearing those same brown semi-brogue Tentertons. I got an email from the manufacturer about this, actually.
Did you? About this?
Yeah, about this passage. They said they were very, very pleased to have been mentioned in a best-selling novel, but they had a slight quibble because I described the construction of the sole a little wrong. I mean, they obviously know it inside out because they build it. I can only look at it from the outside in. I was doing my best. But
you had a slight
discrepancy, yeah, which may mean they won't send me any free shoes, but we'll see.
Oh, well. There's also a moment here when you're, I guess, in Chinatown, and he carried the 6th Avenue chair. You're carrying a chair on your back, trying to find out where it came from. And the owner of this secondhand store comes forward, and to the question, you sold this chair? He says, yeah, about a week ago. And $5, the guy said. I don't want to buy it, Reacher says. It isn't yours to sell. You already sold it once. I want to know who you sold it to. That's all. $5, the guy said again. You're not understanding me. The guy smiled. No, I think I'm understanding you very well. You want information about the purchaser of the chair, and I'm telling you it'll cost you $5. I love that. That's very good. Without going into, well, that's one of the many passages in the book which give one a real feel for the city of New York. And you love New York.
I love New York, yeah. And I love all the inhabitants and all the sectors of the population. And what I was trying to do there, people expect the Chinese population in New York to be somehow difficult to communicate with. Mm-hmm. And what we see here is that the guy is actually more articulate than Reacher.
Right, he is. One of the reasons you're not going to be able to put this book down is it has many serpentine plot twists. We'll look at some of them when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. The guest today is Lee Child, talking about The Hard Way, a new Jack Reacher novel published by Delacorte. And the New Yorker magazine, after all, they don't lie, says ranks in the first tier. I guess that's either you or your writings or both. Before it's all vividly over, one feels confident that Reacher, smart, ruthless, and brave, will not only get his man, but make him suffer. And he does.
He does, yeah.
He does.
People call my books noir, which is actually wrong, because a noir style of fiction is composed entirely of shades of gray. Mm-hmm. My books are about justice. There are good guys, there are bad guys, and the good guys will win. Count on it.
They will, and there's no mistaking the good for the bad.
Exactly. They're very different.
Yep. Before we get to plot changes, I want to talk about a kind of partner in this book whom I liked very, very much. A woman, an ex-FBI agent by the name of Lauren Pauling. Is it usual for Jack to have such a good-looking partner?
You know, it's usual for him to have a very good-looking partner, but the issue with this book is that this one, Lauren Pauling, is a little older than the partners he traditionally has had. As a writer, you can sometimes become a little blind to what you're doing, and somebody said to me, why are Jack's buddies always 36 years old and blonde? And I thought, you know what?
Never mind. I have an answer.
Yeah. But so I thought, that's right. So I thought, okay, let's make this next one an elegant woman of more than 50 and see how that works.
And she's got a splendid apartment, and she's got a great mind, and she has very, very good connections for sleuthing.
She does. Because she was ex-FBI, she still has a bunch of numbers in her cell phone.
See? And she has a connection at the UN, and she has another connection that they don't make too much of at the New York Police Department.
Right.
And she can pack up and take off at a moment's notice. I like that about her.
I like that about any woman.
Now, what about the plot switches here? This, ostensibly, on the surface, is a book about a kidnapping. But I don't think it's that after all, because it seems to me that in its own way, it is or becomes something much more. It's about one soldier, if you will, trying to bring down another.
It's about a hall of mirrors, essentially. It's up front, it's presented as a kidnapping. Reacher steps into the hall of mirrors and for one very specific reason starts to think, well, was it a kidnapping or wasn't it? And that's the issue that is on his mind. It ends up, the answer arrives eventually, but for a completely different reason than he was anticipating from his earlier information. It might be a kidnapping, it might not be, it might be a second alternative, it might be a third alternative, which is why, as you pointed out, Reacher's confident assertion. He's a great investigator. He's used to doing this, and he comes up with some very solid conclusions. They're all wrong because the situation is so overcomplicated. It's something he's never imagined before. It's so wrong that his overconfidence leads him to almost nail the wrong guy.
Yes, yeah. The other thing is that just when you think he has it straight, he doesn't have it. It kind of slips away on him, and he has to, in a sense, restart.
Yeah, that's why the book is called The Hard Way, because at one point she says, what are you going to do? And he says, we're going to have to do this the hard way.
The hard way. They're going to have to check clues,
right?
Check backgrounds.
Start over, look at everything fresh. And, sometimes investigations go like that. Sometimes they're easier because you get a break or you get information that's pertinent. This time he's got nothing at all.
One of the interesting things about doing it the hard way, I think, is that it puts all the fancy stuff that we have in its place. That is computerization and databases and all that kind of thing. They are simply a tool. They are nothing more, and they're not going to solve anything.
No, and there's a lack of fascination if science can solve everything. CSI type of stuff. I love watching those shows. But
yeah.
It kind of makes for a short book if you can sort of, pick up one drop of blood and that tells you the answer on page 3.
Yeah.
So this is much more of a cerebral exercise.
Look it up in the next catalog you get from your computer company to see how it was really, really done.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about the next book. See, I want his friend from the FBI to come back, but the way you end this book, I don't think so, because the very last sentence or two is nobody knew where Jack Reacher was. He had left Grange Farm 2 hours after the backhoe had shut down. I'm not going to say what the backhoe was doing, and there had been no news of him since. I don't think she's going to be back.
I really hope people wish she would come back, because that shows the character worked. But what I try and do is, instead of giving them what I know they liked last year, I want to give readers what they're going to like next year.
Well, it's very, very simple. Wait for the next Jack Reacher book after you've read the previous 9 in paperback, and you'll find out whether my favorite character comes back. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.